Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aubin Skolnick, and I am the Associate Marketing Manager for Highland Solutions. I'd like to thank you for joining Highland today for our webinar on leveraging SugarCRM in the medical device field. Our specific focus for today's presentation will be selling to providers in a challenging purchasing landscape. Our presenter today will be Jon Berbaum, VP of Solutions for Highland. Jon will get us started discussing the challenges of a changing market, and will move on to address and demonstrate a specific use case that has solved many of these challenges. At the conclusion of our webinar, we will open it up for some Q&A. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them on the GoToWebinar questions bar on your right, and we'll address them at the end of the session. Otherwise, at this point, if everyone is ready to go, I will go ahead and pass it on to Jon Berbaum to get us started.
Thanks, Aubin. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I'd would like to take us through, we got a lot of ground to cover today in about 30 minutes, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. And so I'd like to start out just kind of laying the groundwork of some of the rising challenges in the medical device field, and especially selling into medical devices. We'll talk about that for a few minutes, and then I'd like to show you some about how some teams have used CRM and SugarCRM in particular to rise to some of these challenges. So obviously selling in the medical device field has changed. The industry as a whole is going under a lot of transition, regulation, obviously government oversight, as well as other dynamics in the field. And I'd like to touch on just three in particular to sort of frame what in specific is driving change amongst selling teams in this industry. I just want to scratch the surface about this new sales paradigm. So in the old paradigm in the medical device field, it was a classic relationship-based sales model, right? It was field sales reps who made a lot of calls to physicians, material managers at acute care or post-acute care facilities, and sold primarily through the strength of relationships. And there were perhaps some reps that were more strategic sellers dealing with larger entities in the industry. But if we look, the first major theme of the three I want to touch on that's been happening really over the past decade, and which is accelerating, is the consolidation of healthcare providers and even of group purchasing organizations that these facilities are a part of. You can see this is a study by Bain & Company that tracked consolidation over the last decade. And you see the huge spike in 2014, and in 2015 that trend continued. Over 20% of all acute care facilities were involved in some sort of M&A activity in 2015. And the consolidation in the field means that all sales are becoming more strategic, less relational. Going along with this, even the decision makers within deals selling medical devices to acute care facilities, the decision makers are becoming consolidated. This is a chart showing the number of physicians in a private practice versus physicians that are employed directly by a hospital and practice. And this underscores the trend away from physician influenced or physician decided selling. So now basically every purchasing decision in this space is increasingly either made by or constrained by executive leaders in a provider network. And so while physicians may still have influence, material managers may still have influence and leeway to make decisions, the types of material that they can select from, or sometimes the decision itself, is governed by a CFO, some other C-level or higher level executive within the delivery network or the GPO. And again, this accentuates the same shift away from relationship-based selling into much more strategic opportunities where there's more value to be had, there's larger sales to make, but the number of sales are smaller and the decision makers are more centralized. And increasingly decisions are made based on, as we all know, therapeutic value, the ability to demonstrate therapeutic value of what we're selling, and financial efficiency of the models we're putting in place. So this is introducing more and more specialization on the materials that we're selling and having that specialization available in the sales team, as well as the ability to financially model and put together pricing and packaging that's compelling at scale. And the final trend I want to touch on briefly is commodification of products. So if it weren't bad enough that sales are less relational, more centralized, innovation has been trending down over the last decade, as measured by review cycles from the FDA. So this chart is actually showing the percent of initial requests for Class 2 devices, medical devices, that the FDA has been requesting additional information on. And you can see the trend, whereas a decade ago, maybe only half of all devices were undergoing additional scrutiny from the FDA. That's gone up to almost 75%. The cost and time to bring new products to market as a result has continued to grow. And so what the result of that, of course, is that it's more difficult to create differentiation when selling medical devices based on the product itself. So that certainly still exists throughout the industry. But many times when we're selling, the product itself is somewhat commodified. It's pushing price down, putting pressure on margins, and creating more difficult and more competitive selling situations. So how do sales teams, high-performing sales teams, respond to these types of challenges? Essentially, we need to create differentiation in sales itself. And there's a couple key ways that happens, right? So our selling activity is transitioning increasingly to value-based selling. So therapeutic value, cost efficiencies, away from relational selling, although relationships will always be a part of how we sell. It's increasingly driving the need for close collaboration between selling teams. So financial specialists, product specialists, general field sales and account executives all need to collaborate together in very close and synergistic ways in order to close these larger strategic deals. It obviously requires key account focus, so focus on the larger and growing, increasingly larger GPO networks and integrated delivery networks that govern sometimes many acute care facilities all under a single umbrella. And that, of course, means that we need to deal intelligently with contracts, with pricing. And of course, what we're talking about today is that all of that is enabled with a CRM. So obviously, as you can see at the bottom here, anytime, this is true of any industry, but especially true of this one perhaps, when our sales team can actually articulate the overall value, we retain customers, we grow market share, we grow profits. All right, so I'd like to talk a little bit about one company in particular who was facing these challenges: consolidation, centralization, commodification, and how they used SugarCRM in particular to respond to those. So a couple years ago, Universal Hospital Services, UHS, embarked on this journey. UHS is based in Minneapolis. They provide medical equipment and sometimes staff to acute care and post-acute care facilities across the country. So they have about 1 million pieces of equipment in the field and are spread across 80 district offices across the country. And UHS was facing these exact challenges. They were needing to move from renting or selling equipment to the material managers in a hospital or post-acute care facility, up to strategic selling at the C level, which would allow more flexible contracting and pricing and larger deals to be driven that were mutually beneficial to both their customers and to them. And so they needed to bring their sales team through that transition, and they also needed to put the tools in place that would enable that. It meant obviously a retraining of the sales staff, a transition to value-based selling. It meant the introduction of many new specializations across their product lines and mapping those territories of specialists across their existing geographical sales team. It meant trying to figure out how to coordinate all those specialists into the appropriate sales and make all of that visible. They had grown through acquisition, and so it meant increasing customer visibility between their business units so that they could cross-sell and sell together. It meant trying to figure out how to handle GPO and contract data, and it meant trying to improve their financial forecasting. And of course, as is the case now with any enabling technology, it meant being able to reach their field sales in the field where they were, mobile devices, iPads, on the move, and put this sort of information at their fingertip. And so UHS is a couple years down this journey, and they've seen some pretty impressive results. They've made an incredible impact in decreasing sales overhead. So from their sales support and their field sales team, they made about a 400% reduction in overhead. They've reduced new ramp time for their reps by over 30%, and they've increased the forecast accuracy of their forecasting to within a few percent. And so what I want to do is I want to walk you through an instance of SugarCRM that demonstrates how to get these kind of results and how to deal with these kind of challenges. And so I'd like to use the next about 15 minutes to just walk through the system, and we're going to paint kind of a story of a field sales rep for a medical device company who is using Sugar as part of this overall transformation, trying to sell in a value-based way, trying to sell with a team. And so the person we're going to follow today, his name is Chris. Chris is starting off his Wednesday morning. He's an account executive for a medical device company. And he needs a couple things, right, as he walks through his day. And this is general across all CRM usage. And again, definitely applicable when we think about medical devices. CRMs for a long time have been focused on making things visible. So at its very basic, making Chris's pipeline visible to his manager. And they've evolved from that to making what Chris is doing visible to his other team members and encouraging collaboration. So Chris obviously needs visibility to his customers, to the IDNs and GPOs that they're related to. He needs to manage his own pipeline and interact with his team. But CRMs are evolving beyond that, right, into not just visibility, but actually intelligence. So helping Chris sort through what's happening in his customers and in the environment around his customers so that he can respond intelligently. And so we're going to look at both of those things together. So essentially what we're going to walk through is Chris sort of working off of his dashboards, looking at some contracts and how he might respond to them, taking a deep dive into an account to gain some insights, getting on the move and interacting with his customers and team on his mobile device, and then finally actually identifying an opportunity, pricing it, and moving it into his forecast. So we're pretty narrowly focused today on kind of a Wednesday in Chris's life as he's working with his customers and prospects. Okay, let me shift over to our demonstration here. All right, so Chris is starting his Wednesday morning with a cup of coffee and his CRM, which is what every salesman loves to do. And let me orient you to what Chris is seeing as he tries to get his head around what's happening this Wednesday. So this is Chris's home page inside of his CRM. It's personalized to his own stuff and what he needs to see. And so obviously Chris is looking over what's happening today. He's got a presentation this afternoon with one of his customers. He has a couple calls coming up today. And he has a few things to do. So Chris is kind of oriented to his calendar and what he's tasked out. And now you can see in his activity stream, this is a place that shows him everything that's been happening recently in and around his customers in the CRM. So new contracts that are put in place, updates to opportunities, new notes and documents from his team. And at the top, there's a couple messages that have been sent to him that are important to him. This first one is from Jim, who happens to be the national account manager for some of the GPOs. And he's noted that he signed a new contract for surgical equipment for a GPO and is asking us to take a look. Then we also have a note here from one of our surgical specialists, David Whited, who linked to an internet article about a doctor who's innovating some microsurgery techniques at Northwestern Memorial, which is one of my accounts. So I'll tuck that in the back of my head and scroll down and look at a few other things. This is the part where we start to think about intelligence. What does Chris need to know that he needs to respond to? We have two examples here, very simple. One is a list of accounts that Chris hasn't seen or his team. They haven't visited or called in more than 30 days. So the CRM is keeping track of the email and phone and face-to-face conversations and is identifying when there are gaps. And so Chris can track this for his accounts, for key physicians that he's targeted, for even key contacts at certain accounts that he's interested in, so that he can tell not only for his own activity, but for his team as well, where are potentially people not getting the kind of attention that we need to hit our numbers and drive the revenue we're looking for. And then on the right-hand side, a similar sort of idea, but filtering contracts that are relevant to Chris's work. So you can see there's a couple of contracts that are expiring in the upcoming 30, 60, or 90 days that may need Chris's attention. In this case, they're for purchasing organizations, but they could also be directly with accounts that Chris is working for, you may need to respond to. And this last one we see is new. This actually seems to be the contract that Jim was referencing above in the activity stream. It's a new contract for surgical equipment for Chicago Metro GPO. And we can see his quick note that we've actually moved to preferred pricing A for this GPO. So Jim's going to drill into Chicago Metro. So this is an imaginary group purchasing organization who covers some hospitals in the Chicago area. And if Chris wanted to take a deeper look at perhaps some of the activities or documents that surrounded what's happening with this GPO, he could do that. But what we're seeing on this screen is a very high-level summary of how it impacts Chris. So we can see a map of some of the accounts that Chris covers that are impacted. They're members of this GPO. And Chris can also see the list here of his hospitals that are members that would be impacted by this contract. And we can see all the contracts in place with this particular GPO below. If we want to drill into the actual document and see the detail of the pricing schedule, we can. So as Chris sort of surveys, of course, the one thing that jumps out to a salesperson is that Northwestern Memorial here, we're seeing their revenue performance in the CRM. So this is their 2015 revenue at about $500,000, and their 2016 revenue year to date is about half of that. So we're trending down. We have a new surgical contract in place. And so Chris thinks, of course, well, let's drill in and see if there's something more that we can find out about how we could potentially drive some more business with Northwestern Memorial. Okay. So now Chris has followed the path of a new contract all the way down into a particular customer that he's looking at. And we're going to spend a little bit of time walking through sort of what Chris can do in the CRM, how he can interact with his team and with his customer to move business forward. And when we're looking at this account screen, there's really two kinds of data that we're interested in, right, as a salesperson. On one hand, we need really rich, detailed information about what's happening around the customer. So who's been interacting with them, what they've received from Chris or from his sales team, and more information like that. But we also know that if the information is too granular, it becomes actually a chore to sort through everything that's happening. And so we also need summary level information that Chris or members of his team can absorb pretty quickly. And so we're going to show some of both of those things. So the first thing we're going to look at, here we have kind of the summary of the customer. So here's Northwestern Memorial, a little bit about them, where they are and how we can contact them, and the last date somebody talked to them. But on the right-hand side, we actually start to see some revenue performance by product line. And this is tracking the year-to-date performance over the last 3 years. We can also lay over this performance to contract. One of the real challenges in this space is we could put contracts in place for bulk level pricing, and it becomes very difficult for salespeople to tell how a customer is actually performing to that contract. But obviously the first thing Chris notices about this is that his surgical product line has been historically underperforming compared to the other products that he sells over there. So more good news for potentially create an opportunity off of this new GPO contract. And the other thing Chris may want to explore, as we see below, another difficult challenge in this space is the ability to track all the relationships between a particular entity and others, GPOs, things that are part of the IDEA network or campus. So in this case, we can see here Chicago Metro and all of Chris's accounts that are a part of it. And if we want to interact with this and drill into it in a deeper way, I can now put Northwestern Memorial in focus and see Lurie Children's Hospital and the Princess Women's Hospital and many other potentially organizations that are all fall under the umbrella of Northwestern Memorial. And so we can explore these relationships, explore who's responsible for these organizations, and make sure we understand how we're fitting into the overall selling process. Okay, so we have a little sense of how the customer is performing. Now, Chris is going to change his view and just look briefly at what he and his team have going on over at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. So we have a high-level view of our opportunities, the business we've won or lost with them in the past, as well as what's active. We have a quick summary of the overall cases that our customer service team has been interacting with Northwestern Memorial for and what may be open at the moment. So, for example, I could drill in further and see I actually have a case about delayed delivery, and I may want to explore that a little bit more before I interact with them. And then I can get down to the very detailed level of information, right? So when we talk about granular information, we start to see underneath Northwestern Memorial all the meetings that have been held or scheduled with this customer, detail of all the opportunities in flight, the contacts that we're interacting with there, the organizations that they're a part of, and the GPOs that they're related to. So we really have the full picture of everything that's going on with the customer. And then the final thing that Chris is interested in is who is his team for Northwestern Memorial. So who from all his specialists are assigned in and collaborating with him here on this account. And so you can see the financial SMEs, wound care, surgical, critical care, all of the folks that are surrounding Chris's efforts to sell into this customer and bring in their own specific expertise. All right, so the last thing we're going to look at on this screen, we can see here again our friend David Whited, who's actually the hospital operations manager for this customer, who has sent us this note in the CRM about Dr. James Chandler. And so I want to follow up on that, look again at my customer. I'm pretty sure that Dr. James Chandler is not one of the people that we know. And so we're actually going to use our Dun & Bradstreet connector to see if we can find James. And maybe he's someone that we could get some intelligence from about the possibility of selling to. So here's James. He's actually a professor at Northwestern and a doctor at the hospital. So we've got some email and phone number information here. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab that and drop it into the CRM so that he's someone that I can follow up with. And I'm then going to reply back to David using, I can spell David's name. Say, David, thanks for the note. So we'll tie out to James. And ask if David can give us a hand to make sure that we are interacting with the right person. All right, and then finally, before I hit the road, I'm just going to grab an opportunity and put in a little information to know that I'm targeting to sell some surgical equipment to Northwestern Memorial, and we're still at the prospecting stage. We haven't really gotten started yet. So that was a long cup of coffee, which Chris has finished investigating his customers, and now he's going to hit the road. And so obviously we need to be able to work with reps where they are. And so we're going to use Sugar's mobile device to show Chris on the move. So Chris is going to open up his CRM app on Sugar. And he's been out, he's done his meeting for the afternoon. He's getting back into thinking about what he needs to do for the rest of the day. And so he's pulled open his app, he's pulled open his dashboard. Try not to turn my phone sideways there. And he's going to go back and just kind of take stock of what's happening in his day on his dashboard. We're going to go back and look at the activity stream, what's happening here. Okay, let's say, now would be a good time to give James a call. Let's go into our contacts. It's our friend James Chandler. So seems like it may be a good idea to give James a call. update his number so we don't call him for real. And while Chris is out on the phone, he can just hit his phone icon from his app, give James a call, have a little conversation with James, get some information, hopefully, about what James is doing and how it might help him sell some of the equipment that James needs to the hospital. You can use our voice to text to dictate our notes, and then save that call. And it just so happens that James is free this afternoon. We can also pull up Northwestern Memorial, drop its street address into our mapping on the phone, and head on over there to have a brief conversation. So Chris is wrapping up his day. He's had a good conversation with James, got some information about how we might actually move this opportunity forward. And so Chris is going to wrap up the end of his day, just coordinating with his team on what their next steps are. And so we're going to grab this surgical equipment opportunity that we created this morning. You can see the CRM has automatically associated the relevant team members who are part of a surgical opportunity. So Angela is our financial specialist, Mike is our surgical specialist, and we're coordinating here. I can even see that Angela and Mike have already dropped in a couple documents that may be relevant to what we're trying to do. And based on my conversation with James, I have some information about what we might be able to sell. And so one of the real challenges that we've been talking about, of course, is pricing and contracting in this space. And so this is kind of stepping through how we can remove the pain and the uncertainty and, frankly, the error of trying to contract or price with a customer like Northwestern Memorial when we may have account-specific contracts in place, we may have list price contract or list price to go with, we may have one or multiple GPO or an IDN contract that all overlay this one customer. And of course, all of them cover different product lines or overlapping product lines and SKUs. And so one of the things that we want to do here, right, is consolidate that information in a way that's easily accessible and actionable by the rep. So let's search for a product. And we'll autocomplete here. This VLK 883 is actually the item that we're looking for. And so we'll select that. We'll fill in some information. Obviously, terms are important here. So we've got a start date and an end date. It's a little ambitious for Chris to think he's going to sell it today, but we'll leave it like that. And maybe he needs 100 of these. So let's search through. It's going to search through the contracts we have available and come back with a couple matches on what we're trying to sell, and it's going to rank them by pricing. Right? And so it is true that this new GPO contract that was put in place does offer the best pricing for this, and so we'll just say that we want to add that as a line item under this opportunity. Drop us into our line item, pre-fill it out for us, and we can adjust our term if we need to. Typically, the kind of sales we're doing here, of course, are rental or leasing sales. Sometimes those are bundled with services or just the equipment themselves. And so you can see we're actually tracking monthly revenue and months in the term, and then what our contract is worth. And so you can see if we adjust our term, it adjusts our contract. And our revenue this year is based off our close date. So in 2016, if we're on just a 2016 fiscal calendar, we're going to get 9 months of revenue off this, and it's calculated in here as well. So that's great. We'll move this to a qualification stage. Save this line item. My team is updated on what's happening on this opportunity. And then the final thing I'm going to do here is create a little meeting with my team for later this week. We'll add Mike, our surgical specialist, in, and Angela, our financial specialist, in. Drop that on their calendar. Consider it a day of good work. And the last thing I'll do is go back out to my dashboard, where, like every good sales rep, I'll look at my forecast. based on what's happened for the day. Look through the pipeline I have in place and how I'm tracking for my quota month over month for the quarter. So you can see here the dark blue are the opportunities that I've closed. The light blue are opportunities that are not yet included in my forecast but represent my upside. And so if I close everything I have in the pipeline, I'll have a pretty decent quarter, 1.5 million. And if I don't, I'll be a little lower. So that hopefully walks you through Sugar's tool set and how it can be used both for visibility, collaboration within a team, on the go with mobile, as well as really dealing with the specific contract pricing and team selling issues that medical device manufacturers face. So just as a final thought, obviously, with any technology solution, its proof is in its customers. And so if you're not familiar with Sugar, it is the largest pure play CRM provider in the world. Thousands of customers, about 1.5 million users. And it's spread across all sorts of industries, of course, not just healthcare or medical device. And many of these customers choose Sugar because of the things that we've talked about some today. It's flexibility, how it can be used to really drive intelligence and be tailored towards a specific, the specific needs of a selling organization. And obviously, some of those customers are in healthcare, so billion-dollar plus, as well as multi-million-dollar medical device manufacturers, medical device distributors have all used Sugar to solve the very problems that we're talking about today. And so, in recap, our hope is that my hope is that I've been able to provide a little bit of value today on how you can differentiate in sales, even in the midst of a consolidated and centralizing industry. And with that, that wraps up the presentation, and I'll turn it back over to Abin.
Great. Thank you, Jon. That was excellent. At this time, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to shoot them over. There is a question bar on the GoToWebinar panel. We did get a few questions during your presentation that we'll have some time for. So, Jon, the first question somebody submitted was, we manage our contracts in a contract management system for legal review. How does that information get into Sugar?
Sure. Yeah. So, and that's really common, right, for legal to have their own system that kind of manages the red lines as well as the terms and conditions on contracts. And so typically, I think what we see is that the contracting process begins in the CRM because it's pretty closely tied to the opportunity, and it's part of what the selling team needs to have visibility to move a deal through to close. So using Sugar's workflow automation and their web services, usually the contract begins there. It pushes out a unique identifier and a contract process into the contracting system. And then at the end of the day, we typically don't need all of that legal review information back in the CRM, right? We just need the finished product that is signed. And so at the end of that workflow, the document flows back into Sugar for reference for the sales team. And then, of course, we have a bunch of pricing information that needs to go into the pricing database so we can drive the kind of contract-based pricing querying that you saw in the demonstration today.
Great. We do have another question that came through. It looks like it says, our sales team uses the value-based selling methodology. How does Sugar support that?
Sure, yeah. Lots of methodologies in place, obviously Sandler, Miller-Heiman, value-based selling, the challenger sale. All of these have slightly different approaches to CRM. So one of Sugar's benefits, obviously, is its flexibility. So sometimes to support a sales methodology, you just need to make fairly minimal, configuration changes to how a lead or an opportunity or an account flow through the CRM and what information you are counting or capturing for them. Sales methodology is much more process than it is technology, but technology can help in those ways. So like Miller-Heiman in particular actually has a CRM add-on that kind of does their blue sheet thing. I've seen those have some success, but I actually think sometimes that's overkill. What you're really looking for is can we provide visibility and next best action in the CRM? And usually that's not a huge undertaking. You can do some basic configuration and sort of get that reinforcement to the sales team of kind of the steps that they want to flow through. And you don't need to try to architect the entire methodology in the CRM. So all that to say, it's very possible, and I would encourage a middle of the road approach in trying to do that. That's what I've seen work best.
Sure. We did just get a live question just now asking, can you explain again how you use ops to get your sales pipeline?
I'm not sure I understand the question. How you use opportunities to get the sales pipeline? Is that the question?
Assume, yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So in the CRM, and I'll see if I answer the question correctly, and if not, we can clarify. The individual opportunities obviously represent your dates and dollar values, what you're trying to sell, how much it's worth, when you think it's going to close, and then all of that rolls up into a pipeline for the rep, right? So typically, most organizations are divided by month and then divided by quarter. And so if we go back just into the forecasting page, you can see underneath these charts are individual opportunities that roll up to these sums. So I may have one or multiple opportunities that total up to almost $400,000 that closed in the month of February. And then you can see I have one or more opportunities that are worth about $670,000 that I hope to close in March. And that rolls up sort of into my forecast. And the pipeline is just another way of envisioning the same information. So you can actually see, I actually have 3 opportunities in this system, just one in qualification, one in proposal, and one in negotiation or review. And then if we were to go up further and look at Chris's boss, of course, his pipeline would roll up all of the reps underneath him, and then all the way up to the VP of sales or the CFO who's looking at it at the highest level, rolling up all the pipelines across the entire sales team to see what the region or company-based pipeline is.
Great. Hopefully that answers your question. And then the last question we did have come through, our larger accounts have hospital operations staff on site. How could these people interact with the CRM?
Yeah, great question. We touched on that a little bit during the demo, and that's not unusual. One of the challenges of CRMs can be that the tools can be expensive enough that it's prohibitive to bring operations staff into the CRM, even though those people have a wealth of information about the customer. So if you have a hospital operations staff who actually works for the medical device manufacturer, but works at the hospital, as an outsourced way of managing some of the equipment, that person is interacting with people all the time. And so one of Sugar's advantages, both in their normal pricing as well as their what they call limited use pricing, which is really tailored at this kind of person, is making a tool affordable enough that you can put it in the hands of hospital operations staff, and they can, log in and put in weekly status notes or notes about what's happening at the hospital and funnel all of that really rich on the ground information up to the account executive and the sales team.
Great. It does look like that's the end of our questions. So if you guys think of any more questions after the presentation or want to get in touch, feel free to reach out to us at marketing@highlandsolutions.com. Thanks again, Jon, for your presentation. Thanks to everybody for joining. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Take care.